Hi, this summer marks the 200th anniversary of the birth of Emily Bronte. So I'd like to say a few words about how Wuthering Heights connects to Japan and tell you about the way that works of literature can sometimes have extraordinary, unexpected resonances in vastly different cultures than the ones in which they were created. First of all though, let me tell you about the popularity of the fabulous, almost miraculously talented Bronte sisters in Asia. I was interested to read an article a few months ago in the South China Morning Post about the enormous appeal of Jane Eyre in China. There was an exhibition arranged in Shanghai by the British Library in April of the handwritten manuscript of Jane Eyre and some other manuscripts by British authors, which attracted 20,000 visitors in a month. Jane Eyre was first translated into Chinese in 1925, but it was really in the years following the Cultural Revolution in the 1980s, partly due to the popularity of the 1970 film starring Susanna York and George C. Scott, that Jane Eyre really took off in China. Today it is taught in simplified form in primary schools, has been turned into umpteen dramas and a Chinese opera, and is widely studied by many Chinese literary scholars who find in it themes of feminism, colonialism, and sheer literary mastery they wish to share with their students. Well, China may have gone crazy for Charlotte, but I want to switch sisters and move country and consider the even more amazing story of how fantastically popular and influential Emily Bronte has been in Japan. Earlier this year, a handy book called On the Bullet Train with Emily Bronte, Wuthering Heights in Japan, by Judith Pascoe came out, an interesting 8-year odyssey by the American author into the Bronte phenomenon in Japan. Let me share with you first some of the bare facts about the cultural penetration of Wuthering Heights in Japan. The novel has been published in different Japanese translations no less than 20 times. Just hold that figure in your head. You can read Wuthering Heights in Japanese in 20 different versions. Talk about being spoiled for choice. It's twice been turned into shows by the popular all-female Takarazuka dramatic company and has been transformed into best-selling manga, anime, a film where the moors are turned into a Japanese volcano, and a long-running drama series. Clearly, there is something about the Brontes that appeals to Asian women, indeed to women around the world, and I'd like to consider in just a moment what that is. Yet although there might be similarities between the popularity of the Bronte sisters in different Asian countries, there are also various differences. For example, the circumstances in which Wuthering Heights attained iconic status in Japan are very particular to Japan, and a reason why the novel in that country has much deeper roots than perhaps in any other country. To untangle that story, we have to start with this man, the enigmatic English critic Edmund Blunden, who taught at Tokyo University both before and after the Second World War and gave hundreds of extremely influential and well-attended lectures across Japan. In the 1920s, Blunden did something which would have a transformative effect on the reception in Japan of Emily Bronte, a writer who was at that time scarcely known outside specialist literary circles. Blunden suddenly declared in his lectures that the three greatest tragedies of the English language were King Lear, Moby Dick, and Wuthering Heights. Now, there are a few interesting aspects to this pronouncement. Firstly, you have to understand that there is a long-standing Japanese custom of designating the best three in National Gardens, scenic spots, etc. If you ask virtually any Japanese person which are the top 3 scenic sites in the country, nearly everyone can give you the universally agreed top 3 answer. It's not like this country, where everyone would scratch their heads and come out with all different types of debatable and dubious responses. And 3, after all, is a type of number which is very easy to remember. So Brontë was very craftily tapping into a powerful piece of Japanese cultural psychology and telling them you only have to remember 3 books: King Lear, Moby Dick and Wuthering Heights. But then Brontë was just one critic, so why did it matter? If some critic today was to come out with a pronouncement like this, I don't think anyone would pay much notice. But back in the 1920s, Brontë was profoundly influential for 2 reasons. Firstly, because he was teaching at the ultra-elite Tokyo University, which only 30 years earlier had been the only public university in the country, and which was the seeding ground for nearly all the major literary figures in Japan in the early 20th century. Secondly, you have to bear in mind the importance of the teacher, or sensei, and pupil relationship in Japan. Brontë was a revered sensei at Tokyo University, and what he said carried weight, particularly amongst the elite students who would themselves go on to disseminate his ideas on literature throughout Japan when they became literary professors. Indeed, one of them, Takeshi Saito, was the person who came up with the stylish Japanese translation of the title Wuthering Heights, rendered into Japanese as Arashi Gaoka. But let's consider those works he chose as a top 3. I'm not sure many people in Europe and America today think in terms of best 3 tragedies. But if they were to do so, then King Lear and Moby Dick seem fairly unobjectionable choices. King Lear is certainly one of the greatest plays by the best writer in English, and Moby Dick is arguably the finest novel from the English-speaking world. But I would suggest that although many people consider Wuthering Heights to be an utterly unique, fascinating novel, I suspect few would, like Brontë, have put it on a short list of greatest tragedies. Yet when I reread Wuthering Heights recently, I began to see how extremely insightful Brontë's judgment was. If you think about it, those 3 works, King Lear, Moby Dick and Wuthering Heights, are all concerned with violent descents into self-destructive obsession, madness and the irrational. In fact, all 3 works are strongly linked. I'm sure studies have been done about the connection between King Lear and Wuthering Heights, but I was intrigued when rereading it to discover this is one of the few literary works Emily Bronte explicitly mentions in her novel. In any case, Brontë's judgment had a dramatic impact on the subsequent popularity of Wuthering Heights in Japan, and planted its importance in the minds of generations of Japanese people. But of course it would not have taken off in Japan if, having been introduced to the book, it didn't strike a strong chord within its readership and amongst Japanese women in particular. That major Bronte theme of being torn between the desire for safe, traditional conformity and yielding oneself to wild, irrational desire was something that spoke powerfully to generations of Japanese women, perhaps even more strongly than to women in the West. Why? Because traditions of stoical endurance and the demand for social conformity was often intense in cultures like Japan and China, with their long history of Confucian loyalty and order. Yet at the same time, a wildly rich artistic imagination, a desire to be free, unfettered, to connect to one's real self and tear off the mask of falsehood, was also a major part of Japan's own rich literary traditions. In the 20th century, numerous important female authors, such as the short story writer Taiko Kono, have shown an obsessive interest in Emily Bronte. Cornell's stories, collected in such books as Toddler Hunting and Other Stories, depict Japanese women trapped in conformist social roles, suppressing their true selves and fostering strangely violent, sadomasochistic sexual desires. Some of these women wish to harm themselves. Others like to exert power over young boys. One of her female protagonists leaves her own baby daughter out to die in the snow. Cornell herself adapted Wuthering Heights into a stage play, and together with fellow author Taiko Tomioka, made the pilgrimage to Haworth in the mid-1980s, a journey they subsequently published as a travelogue. In recent years, the author Minae Mizumura, who visited Haworth only 2 years ago, also based the book, a true novel, Honkaku Shousetsu, on Wuthering Heights, setting it in America and Japan. You can hardly fail to notice when you visit Haworth today that there are street signs and notices in the windows of B&Bs in Japanese to cater to the huge number of Japanese tourists. Even Edmund Blunden would surely be amazed at the long-standing impact of his critical choice nearly a century ago. Thank you.